Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Bill and I'm here with Steve. How you doing, Steve?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm all right. What we're going to do today and over the course of many future episodes is give you the experience of what it's like to be in the woods, in the field, and on the trail. Each month we pick a natural history topic, research the science behind that topic, and then take you out to a natural spot to share with you everything that we've learned. And I almost just fell over.
And we're in a pretty natural spot right now.
We are. So, we are in Chestnut Ridge County Park.
Yeah.
And this is, like most episodes, we are about a half an hour southeast of Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the site of our Cooper's Hawk bonus episode.
Oh, yeah. It's
Right.
also the site of a frolf course. Oh, no. Yeah, frolf, right? Frisbee golf.
Yeah, so you may hear, folks, the sound of Frisbee golf in the distance. Or
You know the noise Frisbees make when they fly through the air?
I was referring to the
The
people.
kids, yeah. I say
The
kids, but
kids.
adults play Frisbee golf.
Kids at heart.
Yeah.
All right, so folks, we've had quite an eventful couple months since the last time that we recorded an episode.
Yeah, we tried to record this earlier, but then Bill's whole family got coronavirus.
Yep. So my wife and daughter both came down with COVID over the past month, and the shocking part was my wife had been vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
So she was one of the lucky/unlucky breakthrough cases.
Well, I guess ultimately lucky if she's not having any
Exactly.
breathing issues.
And we do realize that since she was vaccinated, that probably helped keep her symptoms mild.
Right.
Honestly, when she came down with some cold symptoms, we were thinking, oh, it's just a cold. And then one day she lost her sense of taste.
Oh, no. It's like, surely it's a cold. Oh,
I can't
no.
taste this. Yeah, we knew that was a
Yeah.
problem.
Yep.
So that is what's been going on. I had to quarantine for
They
almost...
say 10 days, right? Oh, but because there was multiple cases
Right, it
in
was
your
my
family.
daughter, and then a few days later my wife, and
Yeah.
I had to quarantine 10 days past her 10 days. So that's how they do things here in New York State currently. Thankfully, now I am vaccinated. My quarantine is finally over. I can
Yep.
rejoin humanity.
Well, it better have been over a couple days ago because we did a birdathon together.
That's right. The
Frolfer.
sound- there's a frolfer shouting in the background.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, Steve and I just did a birdathon for our local chapter, the Audubon Society, the Buffalo Audubon Society, and we went along with our friend Rich and birder extraordinaire Tom Kerr. And
Yeah,
we,
both
we-
friends of the podcast.
Yep, and we
Yep.
basically followed Tom around while he identified birds and yelled at us for talking. Mostly Steve.
Mostly me. I have a pretty strong constitution, though, so I could take it. I wasn't hurt at all.
Now, what I do want to do right now, before I forget, because we always seem to forget, is let's talk about what do we see around us. Describe the scenery.
Sure, yeah. One of the biggest things we're seeing is that we're sort of in a hemlock forest, a beech hemlock. Do we see maples?
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's some maples
Yep,
around.
see a maple right over there?
Beech maple, hardwood forest, some hemlocks in there.
Yep.
It's a bit hilly here, which is nice because I feel like we don't always have kind of, I shouldn't say, you know what, maybe it's not that it's hilly, it's just that there's a little riparian area that cuts
Yeah.
through this little bit of forest here.
So Chestnut Ridge has quite a few little creeks and streams, cutting little gorges and gullies through the landscape. And this is a county park, so it's relatively developed. You got lots of picnic shelters, sledding hill, but they do have a really nice patch of woods. And I do have to say, I may offend some of the frolfers out there, but I may have mentioned this in our last episode here, but I always have a grudge against this frolf course because not too far, probably about 300 yards to the north of where we're standing, there was a patch of woods where when I was doing environmental ed, we would often do programs here at Chestnut Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, without fail, at the right time of year, a great horned owl nest that we could take groups to. And the owl was fairly tolerant of us bringing a group of kids close by. And when they put in the frolf course, it was gone.
Yeah. Just imagining those kids, looking at the owl, trying to hit it with the Frisbee. I will say one thing about this woods, though. Just looking around, and I know it's the spring still, it's a pretty bare understory. So I am seeing some trout lily, presumably the yellow trout lily.
Yep.
Because I almost never see the white one, although we do have some spots where it is around here.
Sure.
But other than that, I don't really see anything.
No.
I mean, maybe some small beech, saplings, I guess. But
not much else though. So there are a lot of deer here.
Yeah.
They probably keep the understory relatively browsed.
Yep.
It is May 11th?
Yep.
So I think that's the date. So here in Western New York where we are kind of nearing the end of spring ephemeral season. So a lot of those early spring wildflowers are kind of wrapping up right now.
Yeah.
And spring is well underway, but here we've had relatively cold weather.
Oh, yeah.
So things have been kind of slow to get going.
Yeah, it's in like the mid 40s right now, mid to upper 40s.
We're wearing gloves.
Yeah. I keep a coat in my trunk for days like today.
But it's a nice evening to be out. The sun is out. We had a little rain earlier, but I think we're going to be okay. Hopefully it won't be too windy.
Yeah.
So our topic for today, I do want to thank one of our listeners for this topic. This is one that was recommended by our friend Jerry Thurn.
Man, thanks for taking a suggestion, Bill, because I almost always think of myself when I'm doing an episode, which, they're few and far between, but
The ones that you do.
yeah.
So Jerry recommended this quite a while ago, but when I was going over topics that we could possibly do for this episode, this one jumped out at me. This is focusing on the northern flicker.
Oh, cool. You told me this a couple days ago. I already forgot. On the drive here, I was trying to remember what you told me.
What was this going to be about?
Yeah.
So northern flicker, some of you out there may know it as the yellow shafted flicker or the red shafted flicker.
Yep.
We'll get into those two names. Do you know the scientific name? You're so good with bird scientific name. No,
Nope.
Steve's shaking his head.
Nope.
You know it at one time.
I know. At one time, I spent every day trying to learn avian taxonomy. I would just walk the neighborhood with flashcards trying to learn all of it.
That's beautiful.
It's about, I think I started 8 years ago, and then I roughly ended that 7 years ago.
Well, the scientific name for this species is Colaptes auratus, which means the golden chiseler.
Ooh, the golden chiseler.
Yep. So this is a woodpecker. It's a medium-sized member of that family.
Pick a day.
No, very good.
I know some of it
That's
still.
the woodpecker family. Pick a day. Now, hopefully, most of our listeners from North America, you are within the range of the northern flicker.
Mm-hmm.
At least it's seasonal range, if not it's year-round range. But just in case for our more worldly listeners in other countries or people that may not know, I do want to give a description of the bird. So it's generally brown with black bars on its back and wings. It is about 1 foot long, and its wingspan can be about 1.5 feet, 18 inches to about 21 inches. So larger than your downy or your hairy. It has a necklace-like black patch on its upper breast, and on the lower breast and the belly, it's beige with black spots. Now the males, they're going to have a black or a red mustachial stripe. Isn't that a great word?
Uh-huh.
So this is a stripe. If you can imagine the beak, where the beak attaches to the head, there's a stripe going backwards from that point, backwards from the mouth.
Yeah, it's almost like doesn't it almost have like a teardrop shape to it?
It's an elongated
Yeah,
teardrop.
elongated teardrop.
Yeah. The tail is dark on top, but it transitions to a white rump. And if you know about flickers, that is a very common field mark that people use to identify the flicker in flight. When he takes off, that big white patch on the
Right.
butt is just, you can't mistake it for anything else.
And honestly, you usually don't notice these things until you flushed one and it's flying away from you.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is a bird where you can just look at that, you see that, you say, flicker.
Right. There's 2 times you see it. Or sorry, there's 2 times you experience it. One is when you see that white rump patch flying away from you because you just flushed it, or you hear it off in the distance. Because those are, at least for me, those are like 99% of the time, that's what I'm experiencing with the flicker.
And we're going to talk about the call in just a moment. So there are bright colors in the bird's wings and the tail. In Western North America, it's going to be salmon red, kind of a pinkish red color.
Mm-hmm.
When its wings are open, you can see it in the underwings. And then it's lemon yellow in the east. So this bird is native to most of North America, parts of Central America, as well as Cuba. You're typically going to find it in open habitats near trees, and this can include woodlands, edges, yards, and parks. And I was surprised to find out that in the western U.S., it can be found in mountain forests all the way up to tree line. It is one of the few woodpecker species that migrate here in North America. So we don't see them here during the winter typically.
Right, we see like Downies and Harrys visiting feeders and stuff.
Yeah, but they could be around. Technically, we are in their year-round range.
Mm-hmm.
So typically up in Canada, that's where their summer grounds are going to be. You're not going to find them there in the wintertime. But for most of the lower 48, they are a year-round resident. And then it's weird, like down in most of Texas, the southwest part of California, southern Arizona, that's where it winters, but you don't find it there the rest of the year.
You know what? In Utah, I definitely saw the red shafted.
Yes.
Yes.
Because that's the west.
Right.
And In a couple of the accounts that I was reading, it did say, I wrote this down word for word, it said, one of the delights of traveling cross-country is the moment when the northern flickers change from the yellow-shafted to the red-shafted. And again, we'll get in that in just a moment. Now, there are over 100 common names for the northern flicker, and we're going to go through them all right now.
Perfect.
But I did want to share some of them. The yellow hammer. This is not to be confused with the European yellow hammer. Different bird altogether. It's also called the clap, the gaffer, the hairy wicket, the hey-ho, the wake-up, the walk-up, the wick-up, the year-up, or the gawker bird. And I have never heard any of those common names used.
Yeah. Those have to be related to its call, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, most of those, in what I was reading, it said those are attempts to imitate its call. And what is the call, Steve? Can you do it for us?
Nope. Keek, 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 keek.
That's pretty good. It sounds like a sustained laugh.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we're going to play the call right now, and I'm going to hold this up to the mic. Typically, I put this in post-production.
Yeah.
But we're going to try to do it right here in the field using my phone. We'll see how this works. All right, so pretty long, pretty sustained, right?
Yep. And it'll go. It'll, do it once, do it again, do it again.
Now, we've talked about this on episodes before, where we hear something like that, and we're trying to determine if it's a...
Pileated or a flicker.
Right, so what's the difference?
You know what? I was actually just listening to, I think it was our coyote episode, and I think maybe I had said that I think the flicker goes longer. It goes on for like an extra few notes than the pileated. But
yeah, so if you're a noob that doesn't really know what you're talking about...
Yeah. No, but I was going to say, that is me, though, because I think I get it confused,
Honestly, for years, I knew one of them was longer. I could never remember which one.
And is that even true?
Yes, it is a good rule of thumb. Typically, the flicker has a longer key call.
Okay.
And the point you want to remember, though, about the flicker call is that it's monotone. It doesn't change its pitch usually. It's very even.
Right.
The pileated's call is a key kind of a laugh, but
it kind of rises and falls a bit.
Often it's shorter.
Okay.
So you will have some people say, oh, the flicker call is longer, the pileated call is shorter. It doesn't always work that way.
Okay.
So just going through calls on the internet, even just in the app on my phone, like there are pileated calls on here that are just as long as a flicker call.
Right.
All right. But I do want to give the listeners the chance. So I'm going to play the flicker call again. Listen to the pitch and how it stays relatively the same. It's pretty long. And now I'm going to play the pileated call, and I want you to listen to how the pitch changes and even the speed changes. Now, there's probably some people out there saying, what, are you kidding me? They sounded exactly the same.
Right.
But if you listen back to them, I mean, it's like anything. The differences may not be obvious at first.
Yeah, definitely there were different pauses between the notes. You could definitely tell that. Like the pileated was a bit slower at first, then it speeds up, and then it's slower again.
Right.
So yeah, you can definitely tell that.
So if you hear that call and it's short, just a few notes, it's probably a pileated. You can't say for sure.
Right.
But if you do hear a longer one, if it maintains kind of a steady pace, a steady beat, more likely a flicker. Okay. All right. So for decades, these guys were regarded as separate species, with the red-shafted flicker in the west and the yellow-shafted flicker here in the east.
But maybe before we get into that, maybe let's move to a different spot. I feel like the wind is so inconsistent here.
Sure.
Let's find a better one.
All right.
Okay.
All right, so now that we've picked up some ticks probably, we found a nice beech tree there that hopefully will provide us some shelter from the wind.
Yeah.
So we're... No good?
No. The beech tree is not that good. Usually if you see a tree with a bunch of mushrooms growing off of it and a lot of damage from woodpeckers and whatnot, it won't be alive much longer.
Maybe we'll find a flicker near that. That's actually why I picked Chestnut Ridge. I was hoping we'd be able to at least see a flicker or hear one.
Yeah.
All right, so these guys were considered separate species for a long time. But then back in 1982, they were officially lumped into one species, the northern flicker. And that's why you'll hear people sometimes refer to the yellow-shafted or the red-shafted. And again, yellow-shafted is here in the east, red-shafted is in the west. So as you already mentioned, Steve, they do belong to the woodpecker family, Piccidae. So we're going to get into breeding now. Did you know, I found several different sources that say this, maybe you know something different, but that all members of Piccidae, all woodpeckers, nest in cavities.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So I tried to find exceptions just because when I hear something like, they all do this, I'm like,
Right.
well, there's got to be an exception. I couldn't find one. So usually they nest in trunks or in branches. They typically will excavate a hole into rotten wood that's surrounded by sound timber. They can use man-made structures, including wooden utility poles. Northern flickers will typically use trees, but they can also use fence posts, birdhouses, and they've even occasionally been found in old earthen burrows that have been vacated by belted kingfishers or bank swallows.
Oh, I guess I didn't realize kingfishers had terrestrial nests.
I didn't realize that either.
Interesting.
So they do prefer to excavate their own home, but they will reuse or repair damaged or abandoned nests. And of course, they're creating habitat for other cavity nesters,
Right.
which is a good thing, but that also means for them, there's competition from these other cavity dwellers. So flickers can sometimes be driven out by other woodpeckers, by swallows, or
Owls? Because aren't they cavity nesters too? But they're
So,
not making their own.
screech
right?
owls,
Yeah.
right? There are
They're
some
small.
kinds of owls that are cavity nesters, not all of them, but I don't know if the cavity size of a flicker and the hole would be good for a screech owl. So the last one I was going to share, though, was European starlings.
Oh.
So, of course, that non-native species. So
Right.
one more reason to hate on them, they drive out
And one more
flickers.
reason to hate Shakespeare. I also feel like the starlings might just do it for fun. They don't even need the nesting space.
So you
At this
gotta
point.
you gotta fill us in on the Shakespeare
Yeah,
reference.
so I guess there was something like maybe like 100 different species of birds that were mentioned in Shakespearean literature that were all released in New York City at one point, and the starlings are one of the ones that really benefited from that.
Yes, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It's a positive spin on it. So there was some group, right, that
Yeah.
made it their mission to release here all the birds mentioned in
Right.
Shakespeare. I don't
And-
know if they released them all in New York City.
And
but-
I don't know if there was 100 species. For
Right.
some reason, that number popped into my head. But I will say, I was about to say, and I bet they weren't ecologists, but we know so many ecology stories of like, ooh, let's plant some multiflora rose, or,
I think
to
when this was-
stabilize this bank or something. Yeah.
I think when this was going on, ecology wasn't even a science. at
Oh,
that
that's a
point.
good point. I forgot how young ecology is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it takes the mated pair about 1 to 2 weeks to excavate the cavity, and typically it's about 13 to 16 inches deep. So between a foot to a foot and a half. It widens at the bottom to make rooms for the eggs and the adult, and there's really no nesting materials, except there might be some wood chips left over from the excavation that the eggs and the chicks may be resting on. The eggs don't need camouflage.
To call that a nest. There's usually not a nest, but if
It's
they
a
were messy about
nesting cavity, right?
it. Yeah, right.
So now this one, I tried to find some data to back this up, but there was a reference, this might have been from Wikipedia, that said the white color of the eggs, because they're just pure white, helps parents to see them in dim light.
Interesting. Aren't owl eggs famously white too? Aren't they
think so.
usually not really spotted and camouflaged?
I wonder if we looked at cavity nesters, like what proportion, do they have a greater proportion of just like bright white eggs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting.
Be interesting, yeah.
The clutch of flickers is large, but it can be very variable. Anywhere from 2 to 13 eggs, but the average is 6 to 8. They have the second largest of any North American woodpecker egg. Who do you think's the only bigger one?
Out of the woodpeckers?
Yeah. Who's the only bigger
Pileated?
one? Yeah, pileated. Now, I was surprised, though. I looked that up. I'm like, okay, how big is a pileated egg? It's about 1.3 inches long by 1 inch wide, which really isn't that big, but I guess when you compare it to, say, like robins or chickadees or things like that, proportionally, it's much larger.
Right.
Incubation, both sexes incubate. So I just wanted
That's
to repeat
nice.
that, right?
That's nice of them.
In a lot of woodpecker species, both sexes incubate, and that is fairly rare within birds.
Yeah, I mean, usually you have these deadbeat dads that just bail. No, or actually, sometimes isn't it the reverse too? In some species,
Sure.
right? Don't the dads do it up and the ladies go on to
ladies
maybe
take
have
off.
more families?
So let's talk about that, though. We may have mentioned this in our bird banding episode.
Hold on a second. Deadbeat dad's not in any way some type of offensive term that people use, correct?
Only to deadbeat dads.
Okay, yeah. I mean, nowadays, you don't even know. I would think that there would be nothing attached to that, but...
So if someone out there can tell us why that's an offensive term, let us know.
We'll look at the Patreon numbers. If they go down, I'll know I made a mistake.
I think in our bird banding episode, we did talk about how one of the ways we sex birds when we catch them is we look for a brood patch. So many of the female songbirds here in North America, when they are incubating eggs, they lose their feathers, not all their feathers, but their under feathers on their breast. So they can open up that kind of outer layer of feathers and expose their skin to have skin to egg contact. That's going to increase heat transfer.
Yeah,
so
skin's a better insulator than feathers. I mean, feathers are specifically evolved to not really be great insulators, right? Or, sorry, conductors.
There you go.
Yeah, I used the wrong word. Something that is a good conductor, heat is transferred through it very easily. Something that's a poor conductor, that could be, maybe, like the down in your jacket would be a poor conductor, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we like to say that birds sit on eggs, but they're actually not sitting on them. They're putting their chest on them.
Right.
Yeah, they're not sitting on them at all.
Right.
Even though it looks like they are. So one of the interesting things about woodpeckers is that the males also develop a brood patch. And there are other species that do it as well. I think some of the vireos do, maybe.
I know when we band sometimes, a BP, a brood patch, isn't always...
and our head bander, Erin, there are times where she'll say, oh, how'd you sex that bird? And we'll say, by a brood patch. And she'll be like, that's one of the species where the males get a brood patch as well. So with flickers, the male not only does some of the incubation of eggs, it also does most of the nest excavation. So the topic of our episode, we're not just talking about flickers. Jerry Thurn, someone who helps us with bird banding, he sent me an article a number of years ago about sex roles in flickers and how that deals with breeding, with raising young, because flickers are somewhat exceptional. Woodpeckers are exceptional that both parents are active in raising young, in rearing the young. The males take part in the incubation, which isn't that common among birds. But flickers are even more exceptional because they're one of the few biparental birds, so where both parents take part in rearing, where males contribute significantly more care than the females. Male flickers do most of the nest building, most of the incubation, most of the feeding. Okay? They do even more nest sanitation than females, more removal of waste.
You're kind of worrying me a little bit because I just feel like this species is a horrible thing for someone like Jordan Peterson to find out about. About this, that households need fathers or whatever. He's going to jump on this thing. Him and Ben Shapiro or something are going
Again, we just lost half our
and then we lost half.
Well, but I think, Jordan Peterson may have a few issues with this bird. So we'll get into it. So
we got to beat him to it.
Typically, among woodpeckers, the pairs are going to be monogamous. So there's 22 North American species. 20 of those species are typically monogamous, with a few species breeding cooperatively. So we're going to get into this. So let's see if Steve knows these terms. So what is polygamy, polyandry, and polygyny?
Okay, so polygamy is polygamy, multiple ladies. Polyandry, is that one of the ones you said?
So what's polyandry?
Polyandry is multiple males, because andry.
Right.
And then I always said it wrong my whole life. Polygyny or
Polygyny.
Polygyny, okay.
Yeah.
That one is just the general term for multiple spouses or whatever.
You almost had it right.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Ugh.
So polygamy is one sex and multiple of the other sex.
Oh, okay.
So polyandry is when you have one female and multiple males.
Okay.
Polygyny is when you have one male and multiple females.
Oh, gyne. Okay. Yeah, I did screw that up a little bit.
All right.
Okay.
So let's say that again. Polygamy is just the overall term, kind of the umbrella term, where you have multiple spouses. Polyandry is when you have one female with multiple males. Polygyny is one male with multiple females.
Right.
And what's bigamy?
Bigamy?
Yeah.
Is it related at all?
Bigamy is just bad news. That's when
Okay.
you get married and your spouse doesn't know that you're already married.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Maybe they do. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's just humans. Okay. And also when we talk about polyamory,
Uh-huh.
all right, that's also typically applied to humans because that's like multiple loves,
Yeah.
and we're not applying that to animals. All right.
Just our own lives, we apply that.
Right.
Bill and I are both polyamorous.
Right.
Yeah.
So polyandry, we're going to focus on that because kind of the lead-off study in our episode today is a researcher who found polyandry among flickers.
Okay.
For the longest time, flickers were just assumed to be like most woodpeckers, monogamous. But there was a study in 2002, we're getting into a second, where a female was raising 2 broods with 2 separate males. Now that has been reported in the West Indian woodpecker, which obviously is found in the West Indies, and also in the acorn woodpecker. This is a species found
In the West,
areas
right?
of the West, Mexico, Central America. That woodpecker can be polygynandrous.
Yeah. Multiple men, I shouldn't say men when I'm talking about. Multiple males, multiple females.
Right, so
Yeah.
that's cooperative breeding.
Mm-hmm.
In the acorn woodpecker, you can have groups of up to 15 individuals sharing mates, breeding together, and helping raise the young together. And often young birds from previous years may stay behind to help raise the group's young. Okay? So there's lots of theories about why that happens. We're not going to get into that here just because we don't have the time. So again, we're going to focus on polyandry.
Right.
One female having multiple males. So this is one of the few episodes, I talked about this with you the other day, where this is one of the few episodes where I'm going to be using more than one paper from one researcher.
Oh, okay.
Because in my research, I basically found this woman is like the flicker researcher here in North America, at least the one I could find, Karen Wybe. And most of her research is based on a study site in British Columbia. So in 2002, she published the first reported case of classical polyandry in the North American woodpecker, the northern flicker. This was in the Wilson Journal of Ornithology. So she was just studying northern flicker nesting at her study site, and she found a female. We're going to call her Bernice.
Bernice. Okay.
She incubated eggs at nest A. So we're going to have nest A and nest B. So Bernice incubated at nest A with male number 1. We're going to call him, let's say, Bill.
Bill and Bernice? Why bees?
So hang on.
Okay.
So they were incubating in late May. Then she was recorded at another nest about a quarter mile away, incubating eggs with another male. We're going to call him Steve. So Steve's first nesting attempt at another nest failed on May 28th due to eviction by starlings. Okay.
Yep.
His original mate was not seen again. So he re-nested with Bernice, who laid her first egg at nest B on June 4th. So about a week later. Timing at the 2 nests was staggered. Bernice took incubation shifts and fed nestlings at both nests. While laying eggs in nest B, she continued daytime incubation shifts at nest A. The chicks at nest A, they hatched on June 8th, and Bernice spent most of her time incubating nest B, leaving Dad to kind of feed the chicks, until those chicks hatched on June 20th. So by June 20th, both broods had hatched. Between June 20th and July 2nd, she fed chicks at both nests, but only did a small percentage, okay, or I should say a smaller percentage. So at one nest, nest A, there was a period where they observed over 3 days. They did about 8 hours total.
Okay.
Out of 12 feeding visits during that time, she only did 2. At nest B, they watched one day for 14 hours. She fed only 6 out of 23 visits. So that was 17 and 26% respectively.
Right. She's
Compared,
doing a smaller percentage. Yeah.
compared to a typical rate of around 50%.
Okay.
Okay. So I should say classical polyandry is rare in birds. Most examples are in the order, I want to try to get this right, Charadriiformes. Hopefully I got that right. That's a diverse order of gulls, shorebirds, and marine birds like auks and puffins.
Okay.
So polyandry is apparently in that family, but rare in most birds.
Wait, could I see how it's spelled?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, charaidriiforms.
You think so?
Well, because I've never heard someone confirm the way I say that. Okay.
But let's talk about hatching success. She's running these 2 nests.
Right.
So the hatching success was typical for a flicker nest, even though the female appeared to divide her feeding effort between the broods. All 6 chicks fledged from nest A, and all 7 fledged from nest B. So this greatly benefited this female northern flicker. She fledged 13 young,
Yeah.
compared to the mean in that general population was 5.9. So it was over double. She fledged over double of the young.
Wow.
So was this a fluke? Well, classical polyandry is not only rare in most birds, it's rare in northern flickers. At this site, there was only 1 case among 352 nesting attempts monitored over 4 years.
Wow.
There were only a few reports of polyandry in any woodpecker species. So this particular paper, they listed 7 different examples, 5 of which were from a single population of woodpeckers. I don't remember the species, but that population had a sex bias toward males. So there were way more males around.
Right.
Those results suggest exceptions to an idea that was presented by this one researcher in 1999, last name of Lignan. He published this huge book on breeding systems in birds.
A guy named Lignan doing you know what?
He should be studying trees, right?
Or at least woodpeckers, yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. He said in Piccaday, the full contribution of both genders during incubation and brood rearing was required to fledge young. He thought that since throughout this whole family, the males and the females both take such an active role, that it must be required. And she's saying, well, hang on, this is an exception to that. So a few years later in 2009, she did another paper where she really looked at the social and genetic mating system of flickers. And she was linking it to what she called partially reversed sex roles. Okay, because in flickers, males seem to take a much more active role than in most birds.
Right, that's definitely what it feels like.
Yeah. Now, we do have to say, in 90% of avian species that have biparental care, so if you take all birds where both parents are taking part, they're socially monogamous.
Okay.
I do want to point out I said socially monogamous. Okay. But 90% of those species have extra pair young, which means the female mated outside the pair bond. Okay. But we're going to call that EPP, extra pair paternity.
Okay.
All right. So you have this pair, we say they're mated, they're monogamous, but the female is mating outside that pair. She's not necessarily raising those young, but she's mating.
Okay, so
it's not polyandry.
So let's call
necessarily.
Let's call the extra pair Pool Boy Chet.
There you go.
So Bernice has found another.
Now this, when I was researching this led me down a path where, for the longest time in biology and wildlife biology, they assumed like monogamy was considered the rule. But once we start getting into DNA,
Right.
that's where we get into this distinction between socially monogamous and sexually monogamous.
Yeah.
Okay? That is a distinction. You can have a pair of animals raising young together. They're socially monogamous, but you might have the male or the female having sex with others outside that pair bond.
Yeah, and to be fair, aren't we also finding that with humans, with 23andMe and all that?
But this actually led me to a book that I want to check out. It's by a guy named Bruce Bagmill. He's a Canadian biologist. He published a book called Biological Exuberance, subtitled Animal Homosexuality and Natural Diversity. So in the small excerpt of this book I read, he basically contends that for decades, for the longest time, again, wildlife biology, all these people that were observing these animals taking notes, they had this bias of, you have a man and a woman, they have sex together, they raise a family together, that's how it works.
It's like, it's the nuclear family.
Right. Talk about Jordan Peterson, right? But Bagmill argues in this book that a lot of times in history, when researchers would look at animals having sex, they would just assume it's a male and a female.
Right.
But maybe it's a female and a female, or a male and a male. Right.
Especially when you don't have sexual dimorphism.
Right.
Some of these species.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So his book actually was used, I think this was in the early 2000s, when here in the United States there were actually still a lot of laws on the books in certain states that outlawed sodomy.
Oh.
And this went to the Supreme Court, and this book was cited as was used in the case to help overturn those laws, because a lot of times it's argued that
it's only natural or something.
Exactly. Homosexuality goes against nature.
Right.
And he's proving like, no, it doesn't go.
Right. But
it's happening out there.
I would hope that the Supreme Court, when they saw this argument, they're like, hey, cool book, bro. But the appeal to nature logical fallacy shouldn't hold up anywhere. So even before, when people were saying it's only natural, you should have not taken them seriously in the first place, because who cares what's natural, because natural doesn't mean good.
Right.
Right.
We shouldn't be flying in planes.
Right. Like science doesn't tell us how the world should be, it just tells us how the world is. Right. So no appeals to nature, guys. Anyone listening who's still doing that.
So northern flickers are normally socially monogamous, but about 5% of females per year may have 2 nests at the same time with 2 different males. So they may be polyandrous. Now, I do have to say, in the second study, she quoted this statistic of about 5% of females, of northern flicker females, may have 2 nests at the same time, maybe practicing polyandry. But I couldn't find where she got that 5% number from her first study, where she was just reporting that she found a case of polyandry, to this study where she was really looking at mating systems of flickers. So I don't know where that was. So Karen Wybe, if you're out there listening, let me know.
Oh God, that would be cool.
Wouldn't it be cool? So what is it about certain females that cause them to become polyandrous, and what's the reproductive payoff? I mean, it seems obvious. Well, they have more offspring, but let's see.
Right. I mean, definitely. So can you remind me, I before we move forward, I want to move backwards a little bit. Yeah. Can you remind me, at least like in terms of the time, what was the temporal distance between the 2 nests?
Only about a week.
So and obviously there wasn't a difference in how many birds survived, and fledged and all that. So this was my thought, is that, and obviously if they're doing it, there's got to be a reason for it. They probably evolved to be able to have multiple broods, one after the next. But that's what I was wondering about, was that I would just assume the second brood would probably have fewer survivors, just because maybe more energy went into the first brood, because obviously the female's using the resources that are within her own body to create those eggs. And so you'd imagine that there would be a difference, some type of difference between the 2 broods.
Be a little weaker.
Yeah, maybe there's a bias towards which nest gets.
Well, hang on, because there's going to be more details coming out about which females do this and why.
Okay.
So it's the focus of theoretical debate right now. Why are these particular females doing this? One hypothesis is that their first mate was of low quality. And maybe
I know a lot about that. I think I'm the low quality mate. No, I'm kidding.
Maybe the female...
I think my fiance likes me.
I think so. You're not of low quality, Steve. You would definitely be the second choice, maybe. Someone who doesn't like.
In a world where there's third choices, I'll take it.
So this hypothesis is tied to female 3-toed woodpeckers that, at least in one study, became polyandrous when their primary male proved to be of low quality.
The 3-toed woodpecker is also a Western species, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've seen one.
And up into Canada. So this researcher, Wybe, hypothesized that for female northern flickers, polyandry increased reproductive output, but that it was constrained by a fairly even sex ratio in the population. She did not think, at least at the outset, that the first male was of low quality. So then she did her study. So go ahead.
No, okay, so, because you sort of just said something, and I just want to elaborate on it before just in case we don't really say more about it.
Back.
So when you're saying it's limited by an even sex ratio, I guess
it's not happening a lot.
Yeah.
Because they can find a mate.
Right, because if you have relatively equal male and female numbers, if you just have a bunch of females taking 2 mates, there's going to be a number of females that won't be able to get their mates.
Right.
Even one mate, they won't even be able to get, unless the males are also playing a similar game where they are also taking multiple females.
That is not happening.
And that's not happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to be fair. You got to spread the love.
So she wanted to analyze the mating system of flickers using DNA markers because she wanted to assess parentage, right? So during early nesting, get this, they would go out, they would identify where the flickers were using calls, and then they would climb these trees and put in small access doors cut into the trunks.
Wow.
So they could climb up, open these doors, get out the adults and nestlings. A lot of times they would put a net over the hole or something like that, and then they could band them.
Wow.
And each bird was given a unique color band combo, so they only had to catch them once, and then they could just look at them and know which bird was which.
Okay.
So,
and then they know which ones they get DNA from too, so they can observe them and they can,
Right. So you could say, this blood sample is from a bird with an orange and a yellow band on their right leg, and a green and a silver band on their left leg. Shout out to the bird banding episode.
Oh, right.
So if you want to find out why that might be a little risky to put on more than one band, listen to our bird banding episode. So what they did is they also collected blood samples, which we already mentioned.
Okay. I assume the blood samples were for the sequencing.
So there were 326 nestlings from 46 monogamous broods and 41 nestlings from 7 polyandrous broods.
Can you give me the first number again?
Sure. 326 nestlings in 46 monogamous broods, and then 41 nestlings from 7 polyandrous broods.
Okay.
No.
It's not the majority.
Let's look at the results. Right, because remember they said it's only going to be about maybe up to 5%.
Yeah, it's constrained.
So let's look at something called let me see if I can say this right. It's cold out here.
Okay.
Intraspecific brood parasitism.
Okay.
What's that?
Okay, so intra is within species.
Like intramurals.
Oh, intramural. What does mural mean?
I don't know, but it's when you play sports amongst people in your own school, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So interspecies would be
between
different species. Intraspecies would be within the same species.
Right.
And then you said brood parasitism, so they're laying eggs in their family members' nests.
Somebody else's nest.
But it's their close relative's nest. Yeah.
No, not their close relative.
I'm saying it's in within the same species.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm using the term generally.
Okay, good.
Right.
So in 83% of the families, all the nestlings were related to both social parents. So what that means is there wasn't that extra pair paternity we talked about.
Okay.
And just hang on to
that.
that.
No pool boys.
No. Hang on to that intraspecific brood parasitism. It's going to come up in just a sec.
I'll try. If I can say it, I'll remember it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's because the other 70% of the monogamous pairs had some offspring related to neither parent.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Those are nests with IBP, with intraspecific brood parasitism. So you have these two parents, they have a group of eggs, but there's an egg in there that's not related to either of them. Some other flicker laid an egg in there. Nests with IBP had 1 to 3 parasitic nestlings per brood. So about 5% of the nestlings in the population were being raised by foster parents. They only found the parasitic eggs in clusters of breeding flickers in the study area. The densities in these clusters ranged, listen to this, 11 to 35 pairs per square mile.
Wow, that's a lot.
Per square kilometer.
Oh, that's even more.
Right, it's even more dense, right?
Jeez, yeah.
So out of the 7 polyandrous broods, 1 contained an IBP egg. But that's a frequency similar found to the monogamous broods. So you had all these monogamous broods. They had about 17% with parasitic eggs. And then in the polyandrous broods, there was about 14%. In 9 of the cases of interbrood parasitism in the population, they were able to identify, in 5 of those, they were able to identify the parasitic female.
Okay.
So who laid that egg? In all, she was a neighbor on an adjacent territory with a nest of her own. And
so she was her own neighbor.
So she laid an egg in the nest of a neighbor.
Oh, okay. So she didn't have 2 nests. She had a neighbor, and
I know this is confusing.
I know, man. There's a lot going on right now.
There is. I'll try to slow down.
I feel like there's 100 tennis balls being thrown at me all at once, and I'm able to swing one or two away, you know.
So just to kind of restate that.
Yeah.
So if we're trying to figure out who's laying these eggs, who are the parasitic females, it's typically a monogamous female. She has a mate,
Okay.
and she's just going to a neighbor's nest and
Right.
laying an egg. It's sired by her mate. The
Right.
dad is her mate, but she's basically just saying, I filled up my nest. I'm going to lay some eggs in another nest. So that's important to point out, that she wasn't mating with someone besides her mate and then laying an egg in somebody else's nest.
Right. She's still she's completely monogamous. She's just also, you know,
Spreading her wealth.
kind of, she's, you know, dropping one kid off
Yeah,
at someone else's house and forgetting about him
Well,
on purpose.
on purpose.
Yeah.
She's forgetting on purpose.
Yeah. It's a strategy.
She never comes back to pick him up.
Yeah.
The timing of the laying in the two nests showed that parasitic females completed their own clutch first, laying one egg a day, and then added eggs to their neighbors' nests. In at least 3 cases, it was apparent that more than one parasitic female was responsible for laying in a nest. Now, the parasitic females that they could ID all went on to successfully raise an average of about 7 offspring in their own nest. So there's no evidence that this was a result of a failed nesting attempt or a poor quality mate. One female that had parasitized her neighbor's nest was also polyandrous, meaning that she simultaneously had offspring in 3 different nests being reared by 3 different males.
Wow.
Right?
That's
She's getting
wild.
around. So this incident,
And there's nothing wrong with that.
especially in birds.
Yeah.
You were talking about what is it about these females?
What's with them?
So now remember, there's only about up to 5% of them in flickers per year, right?
Right. Because you can't have too many. There's not enough guys to go around.
Right.
Yeah.
So within this study, at least, the polyandrous females, they were significantly older than the monogamous females in the population.
Cougars.
And their primary males
Uh-huh.
were older than their secondary males.
I told you the pool boy thing. It's all coming back to my beautiful analogy.
The polyandrous females, they laid an average of 15 eggs among their 2 nests,
Wow.
compared with the average clutch size of about 8 for the monogamous females. So they raised almost twice as many eggs.
So the older females,
We're
they
getting
have a
together.
higher presumably have a higher fitness than the younger females, but it's not because they're laying more in their nest, it's because they're having multiple nests.
Right.
Wow.
Exactly.
But again, I say that, but it's only 5% of the older females.
Right.
Yeah. Or
So-
not 5% of the older, 5% overall, and they tend to be older.
And it's up to 5%.
Up to
It could be less than
5%.
that. So folks,
Yeah.
we should focus on the fact that this polyandrous activity, it's a small percentage. Flickers are
Right.
generally monogamous. It's going to be rare.
Right. It's like that 75-pound coyote we talked about.
Exactly.
It's not common. It's more of an outlier.
Outlier.
But you know, I mean, with up to 5%, that's actually sort of an outlier. Yeah.
So I know we had a lot of balls in the air. So what she does in the discussion part,
A lot of balls, a lot of analogies, metaphors,
And a lot of eggs out there.
comparisons to other animals.
but what she does in the discussion is she kind of brings it back and says, okay, mating systems of flickers seem to stand out from those of most birds in 3 ways. So let me kind of restate those 3 ways. There's complete genetic monogamy among socially monogamous pairs, which is pretty rare. Remember, 90% of these birds that seem to be socially monogamous are mating outside the pair. But in this study, these 326 nestlings in monogamous flicker broods, there was none. Okay? So they stand out in that way.
Right.
Then there's also the presence of parasitism. IBP, intraspecific brood parasitism, is known in less than 3% of bird species.
Wow. They really stand out.
Right,
Yeah.
flickers.
Yeah.
And it appears to be extremely rare even in woodpeckers, but northern flickers showed a relatively high prevalence of nests with parasitic eggs. So why this high IBP? Before we get to the 3rd way flickers seem to stand out, let's focus on this IBP.
Okay.
So in figuring out hypotheses, it's important to determine context, especially whether or not parasites have their own nest. There's a lot of things going on if we're going to understand all the mechanisms and
Right.
the adaptive significance. They do say their sampling wasn't complete enough to identify all the parasitic females, but even if you're being super conservative, the majority of flicker parasites still had their own nests and mates.
Right, so they're not cowbird-like.
Right,
Right,
exactly.
Because cowbirds, those beautiful, well, I should say the males are a bit more beautiful than females, but that's true with a number of different bird species. But the males have these bright black bodies and these like really nice brown heads.
Right.
And they're Icteridae, right? Or what's the New World blackbird family?
Oh, I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure they're in the same family as like red-winged blackbirds.
We'll put that in the notes.
Yeah. But they, I think they never raise their young. Correct? I think
when they parasitize, they're doing it because they're not going to raise young.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it might have been John Eastman, an author that we bring up from time to time, who mentioned this in his book. But it's like, where does the brown-headed cowbirdness come from? It just must be, programmed in their DNA or something, because they're clearly not learning it from their parents because the parents are nowhere to be found.
Right. Yeah, it's got to be programmed in there.
Yeah.
So these observations about flickers and parasitism, it rules out this idea that they're making the best of a bad job, that there's a lack of nest sites, there's a lack of mates, there's a lack of resources, at least as the sole explanation in flickers for why this is happening. So laying parasitic eggs appears to be a strategy for females to simply increase the number of offspring beyond what they can rear themselves, or beyond what they rear themselves. The data suggests that females first completed a clutch with their own mate and then laid parasitic eggs in the nest of a neighbor. In other birds, whether the female lays parasitic eggs before or after her own, it can vary according to the ecology of the species in question. So she's saying, for future study, we need to look at, well, what's the optimal clutch size? Are there fitness gains to laying more eggs in one's own nest versus another's nest?
Yeah.
These are things we got to look at.
Yeah, I also just feel like there's probably like, I don't know, like the geometry of the nest, the hole they're in.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
I just feel like those can only get so big sometimes.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Right. So because the hole is definitely dependent on the tree size, right? So
this is like a lot of the things we cover. We're not really sure what the story is behind the parasitism.
Right.
But it doesn't seem that they're having a rough time, so they're just dumping off their eggs in somebody else's nest.
And it's important to remember that anything that Bill and I just say in passing, we're just making guesses, or sometimes even throwing things out there that we assume is wrong, and the other one's going to correct us.
If you know better, call us out on it.
Yeah.
So the third point about why flickers are so freaky when it comes to breeding is what we can call facultative polyandry. This classical polyandry, it's only found in about 2% of avian species.
Man, every time I say facultative, you make me define it. So I'm going to make you define it this time.
So you can have obligate, something that's obligate, species have to do it.
Yeah, and now you're obligated to tell us what facultative means.
Facultative means it can happen depending on a situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Some birds are obligate migrants. Some birds are facultative migrants. They'll migrate if conditions warrant it.
Yeah.
So, again, classical polyandry only found in 2% of avian species, and in northern flickers, it seems to be opportunistic because it occurred either when a male lost a mate early in the season or failed to attract one. These trios, the female and two males, usually involved nearest neighbors. But in the study, one female flicker did travel over 1 kilometer between her two mates. So the nests were...
Was that the nearest neighbor?
Somewhat far apart. It doesn't say if it was the nearest neighbor, but she did travel pretty far. So what she is saying, though, is in most of the polyandrous broods, they were neighbors. They were close together.
Right,
so the female had a nest with her primary male, the older male, and then she took up with this other male close by.
Right.
The reproductive payoffs to these females were considerable. And we've said this a couple times. They reared nearly twice as many offspring as the monogamous moms.
Right.
But it appeared that the secondary males only engaged in polyandry to make the best of a bad job. This is in contrast to the findings in a 2006 study that suggested females, flickers doing this, were trying to salvage a failed or failing reproductive attempt. For this study, that was not the case, it seemed, with any of their polyandrous broods.
Right, and even still, it's still a small number of females doing this.
Yeah, exactly, less than 5%, 5% or less. And the secondary males were more often yearling breeders, which may explain their difficulty in retaining or attracting a monogamous partner. Right? So the data on the division of the paternal effort, the caring for the young in these polyandrous trios, there's still not a lot, but it's clear that females contributed to incubation at both nests because hatching success is severely impacted if the female doesn't do any.
Right. So even if she's just doing 17% and
Right.
25%.
Right. The
it's
male
still-
just upped his
Right, right.
incubation. And like you just said, the females did incubate less at the nest, especially of the secondary male.
Now, you had said, I brought up those percentages before. Did they find that that was typical? Because didn't you say it was more typical to be 50-50, right?
Yes.
But is that in other species or in flickers?
In woodpeckers.
In woodpeckers.
And in flickers, it was tough because in one spot it did make reference that males do more of the incubation in
okay.
flickers, but then there was another spot where it said it was typical that it was 50-50.
Okay.
So
And could depend on the population you're studying, you know.
right, that's
and,
true
and,
too.
and that's why researchers will always say the population that they're studying.
Right, and-
because it's important. Because when you make a claim about a particular species, you have to make sure you make that same claim about a particular species in a particular area.
And I'm glad you brought that up
Yeah.
because I might have forgotten that this study, and I'm sure the researcher will go out of her way to say this is studying one population of flickers at one site in British Columbia. All right, so to get back to what we were saying before though, the polyandrous females, they did feed the nestlings, but they seem to just divide their total effort, not up their effort in order to service both nests. They basically say, this is what I normally would give to one nest, I'm just
Right.
dividing it between the two.
Okay.
You're not getting more out of me, kids. Right?
right.
So the nests of polyandrous females, they seem to have high success because males completely compensate for the reduced contribution of the females. So some final thoughts on this study. Polyandry in these flickers, it seems the most profitable strategy for females and the least profitable for males.
Yeah.
In contrast, the parasitism, the intrabrood parasitism, is equally beneficial to both sexes. The relatively high frequency of this should lead to selection for intense nest guarding to prevent parasitism of one's own nest,
Right.
and in turn, this constrains mate guarding by males. It's puzzling, they say, why female northern flickers appear not to engage in extra pair paternity even though they have ample opportunity. Okay, because if there's this high level of parasitism going on,
Right.
then you figure there's going to be more nest guarding. The male's going to be saying, hey, I'm going to be watching out for people trying to dump off eggs. So they won't be able to guard their mate as much.
Okay.
So why aren't the females mating outside the social pair bond?
Right.
Right? It's a question.
Right.
All right.
Although, so you said it's beneficial to the females
Right.
to have multiple nests, and it's not as beneficial to the males.
Right.
But part of me thinks it is beneficial to the males,
Why?
the second male, because those are males that probably wouldn't have found a mate anyway.
It's a good point, but it's
Yeah.
not beneficial to the primary male.
Right. Yeah, it definitely seems like...
Because he's raising the same amount of young, but he's doing twice as much.
Right. So I would say the second male is definitely getting an advantage of being able to mate, and even if he has to put the extra work in to feed the young,
Right.
you know, at least he got to mate. That's like
Right.
infinitely better than what could have happened.
Right.
So,
All right, so I'm looking at our time. We're over an hour. So I do have another study to go to, but I think I'm just going to do highlights for this one. Because she did another follow-up study in 2018 looking at different reproductive parameters like clutch size and earlier egg laying. And just a couple points I wanted to share was that, one, get this. So we've talked about before on other episodes how when females lay eggs earlier, that can lead to higher success when it comes to fledging young. And what they found in this study is that when female flickers mate with older males, they lay eggs earlier.
oh,
So, I mean, I think that's just a cool question. Like, why would it matter the age of the male? Why would that have an impact on the date of egg laying? Why would that allow female to lay an egg earlier?
right.
So what they found, what they hypothesized, is that if you're an older male, you know your territory better.
Oh.
So you're better able to return to a nest you already excavated,
Okay.
or find a nest, or
Know where all the
choose
grub
a
is.
tree that's more suitable,
Right.
right? And they also find that the longer a pair is together, that's going to allow for earlier egg laying. That makes sense because when you return for migration, you don't have to waste time finding and searching for a mate and, proving to that mate that you're a good match.
Do they have, I don't know what it's called, but if a young returns to the same place it was born, that's like natal homing? So these guys return to their same nesting spaces each year?
That I'm not sure about.
Okay.
But that was one of the parts that I just found interesting, is that these polyandrous females, and even regular flicker females, there seems to be a benefit to choosing an older male.
Right, because then you mate earlier.
And a bunch of reproductive parameters increased. They were more successful if they had an older mate.
I wonder if the older males are beefier. And I wonder what they mean by older. You know what I mean? Like
there wasn't a big physical difference.
Because the older ones could be still in the prime of their lives, you know?
Yeah.
Do you know their longevity?
They don't live for very long. So that was actually something that I've skipped over.
Okay.
Is I can't remember exactly, but it was very rare for them to find one that was older than 4 or 5 years old.
Okay.
And the likelihood of a flicker returning to where they nested the year before and finding and mating with the same mate was low. It was like less than 20%.
Wow.
Just because mortality was so high.
Yeah, I wonder what gets them.
Yeah, they didn't go into that.
Cats. It's cats.
Cats. All right. The northern flicker, it's a bird that we encourage everybody to get out there and see. If you're in North America, you can find it almost anywhere in North America. Look for that big white rump patch. Listen for that long kee call that is kind of monotone, doesn't change its pitch, unlike the pileated woodpecker. And if you're lucky enough, see if you can find a female flicker that seems to be servicing 2 nests at one time, polyandrous.
Yeah. And I guess maybe we should end on the question everyone's wondering about. Why is it called a flicker?
I don't know.
I don't know either. When I think of something that should be called a flicker, I think of like a phoebe, an eastern phoebe, right?
Flicking its tail.
Flicking its tail.
Right.
But I don't know about the northern flicker.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
If I can find an answer, I'll put it in the episode notes.
Cool.
Okay? All right. And before we do our complete wrap-up, I do just want to say thank you to one of our listeners, Jake Mantala. We had put out a call, I don't know, a few episodes ago saying, hey, if anyone would like to read our Patreon supporters for the month, let us know. Contact us through email or social media, and we'll set it up so you can record yourself reading the list, and we'll put that into the episode.
Yeah, and Jake even went beyond that. He added some extra stuff in, and we totally invite that. If anyone wants to do this, add something in. We'll edit most of it out, but
yeah, Jake sent us about 2 hours of material.
Yeah, I think we kept everything that Jake said.
We did. And Jake had a great voice for podcasting, so maybe he should start his own podcast.
No.
Not a nature podcast.
Yeah, like a race car podcast
or
something. Yeah.
All right. So I think it's time to thank the patrons.
Yeah, so first and foremost, we'd like to thank our growing list of Patreon supporters. So thank you, Todd Elliott and Lily Case. Thank you guys so much for supporting the show. And we're thankful for every patron, but every episode we'd like to thank our top patrons. So thank you. We named the dog Indy, Sarah S., Rob M., Melissa Marie in Dusty, Arizona, MD, Lauren S., Kelly S., Judy F., John W., Jeff S., Jane H., Jake M., Helen A., Goose Egg, Galen Mack, Esther C., Doodle Dude 82, Celia, Bethany H., Ben C., Andy T., Andrew, Jonathan A., Todd E., Sean C., Rich K., Rachel L., The Drunk Phytologist, it's all one thing, Orange Julian, Ken S., Callie S., Jessica D., Diane F., Daniel M., The Hebranks, Eric G., and Alyssa P. Thank you guys. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. So Melissa in Dusty, Arizona, I'm pretty sure that's Melissa from Buffalo Audubon, formerly of Buffalo Audubon.
I forgot. I should have made the connection that she moved to Arizona, and now we have Melissa from AC.
And shout out to the Hebranks. They were taking part in the Birdathon, and they were asking me the other night when we were putting out a new episode. So here you are, just for you, the Hebranks.
This one's dedicated to the Hebranks.
That's right.
And we also want to thank our new iTunes reviewers. So from the US, we have Nordy999, and from Canada, we have Hummingbird Tattoo, Rye J. Hill, Peachy, Peach Emoji Jess, Jenna 7643, and Joey Jojo Senior Shabadoo.
That is from The Simpsons.
Oh, really?
Oh.
When I see JoJo, I think of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So it's not a Simpsons thing for me, but...
Well, Joey Jojo, thank you so much.
Nice. So we have no updates from the UK, but we do have one new one from Australia. That's Sad in OZ, Sad in Oz. And so Bill and I, we forget to thank people from other countries. We've been forgetting for a long time.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to start fresh by updating the countries that I've already touched on before. But from now on, hopefully, we'll try to remember to hit other countries that have also given us reviews on iTunes and other podcatchers. But I just went for iTunes this time.
So that was all of them?
Yeah.
So not that many.
I was talking for like 10 minutes.
No, I mean from other countries.
Oh, right. These were just updates. The list is longer than this, but
Okay.
we already said them in previous episodes.
All right.
Yeah.
So folks, if you want to support the podcast, you can become a patron. And if you want to do that, you can head over to patreon.com. You can also make a one-time donation through our website via PayPal. Those donations will allow us to keep the podcast going, keep it free, and allow us to do cool things in the future. But if you're like Steve and you can't afford to financially support a podcast,
That's true.
one of the best things you can do is leave a review for us on iTunes or whatever podcatcher you use. We really do appreciate it, and it gets us out in front of other people that might enjoy the podcast.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna blow up my spot here, but I could financially support a podcast. I'm just thinking about. I'm like, I don't have any monthly subscriptions, do I? I am on Funimation because I like anime.
Sure.
So, I pay $7.99 a month. Yeah.
All right, so like Steve used to be.
Right. Yeah. I'm a rich person now, so I can afford anything.
And folks, check out our social media feeds, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you have an episode suggestion, an episode criticism, or you just like to get in touch with us, you can email us at thefieldguides@gmail.com.
Yeah.
And don't forget, you can check us out at our home on the web at thefieldguidespodcast.com.
We instantly get criticism of saying, Steve said he's rich, and I know he said he's a PhD student. Yeah, I lied. I'm not rich.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah.
All right, folks, as a final reminder, please make sure, parents, get those kids outside, let them get muddy, let them get dirty, let them flip over rocks and logs, and the rest of you out there, make sure you get yourselves outside as well. Enjoy the spring, folks, in whatever season you're listening to this episode in.
Yep.
All right, folks, we will see you next month, hopefully.
And we'll actually see you in a few seconds when we talk about Gumleaf USA.
Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh. Sorry, Jack.
Oof. The obligatory scene change to talk about Gumleaf USA.
So folks, we want to thank our sponsor, Gumleaf USA. They make high quality rubber boots. And right now I am standing shin deep in a stream.
And what am I doing?
And Steve is perched on rocks because he did not wear his Gumleaf boots today.
No. And again, like the last episode, or every episode we bring this up, mine are just in my trunk.
Just about 100 yards away.
Yeah.
So Gumleaf has been kind enough to provide Steve and I with boots, and we have used them for everything from birding to herping to
Standing
going
in a
through
stream.
Any season of the year. They come with lots of bells and whistles, and because they're made of 85% natural rubber, they can bend many, many more times than rubber boots that might look the same and might cost less, but are not as high quality as Gumleaf USA boots.
Yeah, and personally, I like low wet areas because the chance of ticks in lower wet areas, very minimal.
That's right. And Gumleaf is kind enough to offer patrons of our podcast free shipping on any of their orders. The offer code is on our Patreon site if you become a patron.
Yeah.
So check out gumleafusa.com.
Thanks, guys. And this time, we'll see you next month.
See you next month.